So we got the fuel cell in. This is what it looks like from underneath the car. It's a fuel safe brand. It's got the Radium Engineering FCST installed inside of it. That means the lift pump, the surge tank, and the high pressure pumps are all self-enclosed in this unit that's inside the fuel cell. No external plumbing. We literally just run fuel lines to the fuel cell, from the fuel cell to the fuel filter that's external, and then from the fuel filter to the rail, then a return line back to the fuel cell. We're gonna run the fuel lines through this opening that we created right here, and they're gonna run along the frame rail, which is gonna take us all the way up to the firewall. We're gonna leave the lines loose at the firewall until I get the motor from Texas Speed. Really looking forward to getting that motor. Here are the lines. We received all this stuff from Ditchworks. These are the appropriate lines because they have Teflon liner inside, so the ethanol is not gonna eat them up. And I really hope I got all the fittings I need. It's always good to be left over with some fittings rather than not have enough, so we'll see how it goes. Cool, and that feels really snug, so I'm gonna stop right there. There's no need to just keep cranking on it. Looks like the hose didn't walk much at all, like maybe like 1/8 of an inch, which is perfect. So, oh, and this is a swivel style, so that's great, a lot easier to work with. We're gonna attach this to the fuel filter and run the line under the car, and then we'll wait until the motor's in the car to actually trim it down and put the fittings that go up to the fuel rail. We got the hose end finished up. We installed it. Here's the pump out, which is gonna go to a fuel filter. And this is the return. -10 for the feed, -8 for the return. And once again, we're using a fuel safe cell with a Radium Engineering FCST. So there's actually 3 pumps inside of here and a lift pump because there's an internal surge tank. We're gonna run 2 pumps full time, and the third one is there just in case we have any issues with the 2 primary pumps. Then we can literally just by a flip of a switch have the third pump kick on and take over from there. So we got the lines hooked up to the fuel cell. We were originally gonna mount the fuel filter like right on top of the fuel cell, but there's kind of not much space up there, and the lines are gonna get like really tangled into one another. So Carlos, you were saying somewhere about there on the fuel filter.
I'll figure something out around here.
Somewhere right there.
Take this off, but yeah.
Cool.
I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, and I think right here would still be pretty accessible if we have to go up on the car. There's really nothing here. This is where the stock fuel tank used to be, so this is the return. We're gonna run the -10 through these Adele clamps as well. So yeah, let's get that filter. Let's remove the bracket that we made that was gonna bolt it to the fuel cell, and then we'll see where it looks happy. Maybe even on the floor or something, because then it'll be out of the way of these lines. Cool. Let's pull that bracket off. I got the fuel filter relocated to the underneath the car. We originally had it mounted like right on top of the fuel cell, but it was just getting cluttered up there. I didn't want it up there. And honestly, right underneath the car right here, I feel is like a better fit, because if we need to replace the element, we literally unscrewed this threaded portion right here, and then it comes out and we can drain the fuel right into a pan underneath the car. I literally took the bracket that we had made that sat on top of the fuel cell, and I actually cut it to be the shape of the floor right here, and then this nice radium billet piece bolts right to it. So here it is tacked in. There's another angle of it right there. Got some tacks. we're gonna pull this off, finish welding it. I'll show you what it looks like after it's welded. And here's the fuel filter installed, and it's looking great. We got a 45-degree Dutch Works hose end here. This is dash 10, and this goes on to the engine bay. So stoked on the way this came out. So we got a brand new diff, new axles, new engine. Everything's new in there except for the transmission. I'm gonna run the same transmission I ran in this car in the S15, and I wanted to go through it. I have, I think, a little bit over half a season on the transmission that I'm gonna be putting in that car, and it's had a rough few events. I mean, I drive hard and we make a lot of power, so I popped this cover off the transmission. This is basically the top cover. The shift linkage is on here. It goes to the shifter. I took that off, and this is really a good, like, kind of inside of how the transmission looks. And looking at third gear, which is this third gear, unfortunately, there's some substantial pitting in the gear. If you look at the gear surface right there, I mean, obviously the transmission worked. It worked fine, but when I see wear like that on the transmission or any gear, I'm not gonna put it in a car and continue to run it. So kind of a bummer. I wasn't expecting to tear down the whole transmission, and now I have to go through all the gears and make sure that there's not pitting in any other gears. The dog rings look really good. So these are the dog rings, these square surfaces here. Those look great. And I do remember putting some new dog rings in this thing at some point last season. So yeah, it's a bummer, but let's tear this thing down and let's see if we find any other damage. If not, hopefully just ordering a third gear set and putting it back together and be good to go. So in order to take this transmission apart, I want to stand it up vertically. The way it is right now, it'd be kind of a tough way to, you got to pull the casing apart, and I don't like it on this surface. So we're gonna stand it up on the bell housing itself. This is the bell housing that I will be running in the S15. It's a QuickTime bell housing, and it's SFI approved. That approval is now, the SFI spec is now required for Formula D cars. The input shaft will stick out a little bit past the bell housing, so I just put 2x4s on the bell housing, and this kind of gives us a good working area to put the transmission on it vertically, and then I can pull the case off and unload all the gear sets out of it. So we're gonna pop this thing on here and get cracking. A little rusty, haven't done this for a bit, but we got the transmission apart. It's actually draining, and this is what it looks like inside the case. Not too bad. It's got a little bit of some sparkles in the oil. And how badass is this Bakchis little toolbox slash workstation? So it's got a stainless steel top, and this is rad. There's actually a drain in there. This comes out, and you can just place whatever you want, and it all kind of drains out. It's got shelves. Anyway, I love working on transmissions and differentials on this workstation. It just, you can make a mess and it all just flows right in here. So we got the gear sets out. This is all still intact. This is the third gear that I was talking about. So you can get a closer look and see the surfaces here are just not nice and smooth anymore. They're kind of rashed up. Nothing like this gear right here. So they're definitely rashed, and we got to address that. We got to pull that gear set out, basically throw it in the trash. So this is the other gear, the opposing gear, which doesn't look as bad, but this one's pretty tragic. We got the actual third gear set removed from the cluster, and yeah, there's another look at what we're dealing with. Definitely don't like the way that looks. Here's the dog ring, which looks fine. This is in really good shape. And the rest of the transmission looks okay. The other gears definitely aren't brand new, but they look fine. So thankfully, it was just third gear. It was a little rashed up. The rest of it looks okay. I'm gonna order third gear and put this thing back together. While we're putting the car together, I gotta get cracking on the body work. I gotta pre-fit it because it's still gotta get painted. So while it's being painted, we could work on the car, but I gotta pre-fit the fiberglass before it gets painted. So gotta knock that out. Taking a break from like wiring other stuff. I basically pulled the mainspring off, and we're gonna jack the front of the suspension up. We're gonna throw the wheel on it, and then we're gonna start mocking up the front fenders, and we'll probably have to do some trimming. I just wanna make sure that when the suspension is completely compressed, that the tire's not rubbing too bad, because I'm just gonna rip the fenders apart if it is. I tend to use majority of the stroke of my suspension. It's set properly to do so, so I gotta make sure there's clearance. We'll trim the fenders, and then we'll send them off to get painted. In order to set where I want the suspension to bottom out, I'm gonna utilize this feel adjustable bump stop right here. So basically this screws onto the shock body, and I can screw this down. There's a ruler on the side, and I could basically make the bump stop adjust like from 0 all the way up to 40 millimeters, because we got a lot of stroke, but we're obviously using a different size of wheel and tire than what the car is made for. So we're gonna have to limit the suspension stroke at some point before we start hitting the actual chassis here. So the feel adjustable bump stop allows you to do that easily, and we're definitely gonna employ that here in order to set this thing up. So installing the feel adjustable bump stop is really straightforward. You literally just put it on the shock after removing the spring and top mount, and you just screw it on. We're gonna bottom this thing all the way out for now. Give ourselves a whole bunch of stroke, and this is like the Pro Long Stroke kit, so it's got a ton of suspension travel. So we're gonna bottom it out. We're gonna place the bump stop in place and get this shock back into the chassis and cycle and see where the tire lands. We'll adjust the bump stop so that the tire isn't rubbing into the chassis. So we got the wheel on, we got it on a floor jack, and it's basically bottomed out. Like there's a little less than a 1/4 inch here, which is perfect because we're basically sitting on the bump stop right now. The feel adjustable bump stop is engaging the bump stop in a spot right before we're rubbing here. And we might actually adjust the feel adjustable bump stop to engage even sooner, because this is just honestly the car's weight without the motor, without anything in it. So if we put more weight on the bump stop, it'll probably compress and definitely dig into here. So it's a good starting point though. And luckily the bump stop's adjustable, so we could fine tune that. If I see any rubbing here, like from testing out the track underneath, then we'll obviously adjust the feel adjustable bump stop to engage a little bit sooner. But this is perfect for test fitting some fenders. So yeah, let's slap that on, and hopefully it's wide enough, but I kind of feel like it's not going to be, so we'll know in just a second here. Got the fender put on, the suspension bottomed out, and ooh, we're very close right here. But you know what? That's totally fine because the actual frame rail is basically the same height as this. So that's looking pretty good. Yeah, we got a little bit of wheel poke, but you know what? I really don't care. It's a drift car, it's functional. The track width is as wide as I need it to be. I want the car to handle well above having, you know, super flush looking fitment. So just a little bit of poke. If we had a tiny tire on there, we'd have a like really dialed looking, I guess, fitment, but it's a race car. So the bumper's on where it needs to be. The bash bar is there. The bumper's like sitting on the bash bar. Fender's on. Man, I really like putting these body panels on because it's kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's coming together. It gives me a little glimpse of what this thing's gonna look like when it's all done. Man, this thing's looking good. So we're gonna pull this back off. There is some trimming we're gonna have to do. At full droop, it was hitting here, so we cut this out. Now we obviously gotta round it nicely so it's not like a sharp edge, so it doesn't look all wonky. We're gonna take this radius and trim it down and body work these a little bit. What's cool about these Duraflex fenders is that the flare and the fender, this is one piece. So the other car is two piece, which is not bad, but there's just a few more things to go wrong. You know, if you hit stuff, this might separate. So a little bit different, same look, but it's all molded as one piece. So I think it'll be easier. All right, we're gonna pull this stuff off and head it down to my dad's. He's gonna paint it that Falcon livery teal and blue, and then we'll have nice, clean, fresh panels to put on this thing once it's rolling.